So, new fashion content in today's world. As we progress through different stages of working from home and fashion journalism inevitably changes its direction, I think we all need to react and reflect on what it is we want to deliver as far as fashion content is concerned, what we want to say that's significant and useful. And to start off with, I think we go back to, something I've spoken about to you lots of times is thinking about what fashion really means to you. I mean, fashion is such a broad church, and we're all interested in, different types and areas of fashion. So start to analyze first of all, by what means you're receiving content, whether that's podcasts, films, Instagram, websites, and all of that kind of thing, and what it is that you're reading that interests you. Think about how content is changing, what topics are now being covered, and what really matters to you as an audience of fashion content, but also what matters to the audience that you're trying to reach as a content provider, if you like. So one of the easiest ways to sort of get into this is to look around at what's been going on in the world of fashion at the moment. So I looked at highsnobiety.com, the website, and they had an interview with Raf Simons about his homewares line. They took a very informal approach. The interviewer talked about being in his or her pajamas, and chatting to Raf on his mobile phone. So it was all very informal and quite cozy. But what I noticed was that they refocused questions to reflect the global interest in slow consumption. And that's something that we have looked at extensively in class: sustainability, circularity, slow consumption. But obviously now with a huge amount more urgency sort of comes into play, and it's interesting to sort of reflect on this in the content that's out there. I mean, some of the questions that they talked about in this interview, how it's nice to consider permanence in your approach, which is the exact opposite to what fashion has been largely, in many respects, for the last sort of, I don't know, forever really. And fashion's been escalating to this rhythm that's very complicated and self-damaging for the industry, and how to constantly stay creative and powerful has been very, very difficult. So now we're living in a world where, a slower approach is inevitable. Things are going to be quite different. Obviously, because they were talking about Raf Simons's homeware lines, they turned to interiors. And the fact is, his range is incredibly expensive. I only know a few people who've got some of his stuff. But what Raf said was, he knows lots of people who it doesn't matter a jot spending, €1,000 or €2,000 on a coat, but they might think twice about spending that on a chair. Obviously there are a lot of people who, that wouldn't be a problem with either, but lots of sort of fashionistas would save up for a special coat, but they might not save up for a special chair. And the reality is that, you've got a chair, it might last you for the rest of your life, but the coat may only last you a season or two. So sort of broadening the scope of what fashion is could be quite interesting. Your design eye, in a way, and what you look out for might be something useful, especially when you see people as interesting and pioneering as Raf, working so hard within those areas. And he's been working with this brand that he does homewares with for, I think over 10 years even. So it's not something that's new, but it might be something that you might want to kind of just look at a little bit yourself, and how other designers are working in that way to sort of enhance permanence and longevity in what they do. Then I looked at Vice. Obviously, Vice is a massive content provider, and they look to how fashion students and their work is being affected by the COVID pandemic. They went to Parsons, New York school, and how they were closing its doors, transitioning to online learning in the light of the pandemic. But of course, art schools around the world are doing the same. And what's been interesting is seeing how you students have reacted and continue to create and innovate in a very short space of time. So I'm very confident that, you know, everything is going to move into this sort of digitized zone, maybe, you know, with a few hiccups here and there, but very interestingly, one of the things that I asked you to have a look at was the Lee Edelcourt podcast that she recorded with Business of Fashion. It's fascinating, and she talks about the age of the amateur dawning, if you like, and the way she explains that is that amateur in the sense of maybe not being completely aware of what you're doing or how it's going to manifest, but having a passion and sort of going for it and sort of working things out as you go along, but also an amateur in the sense of being very passionate about what you're doing. So all of those things kind of come into play with that expression, the, you know, the dawning of the amateur age, and you could be part of that. So that's quite interesting. What else have we got here? I looked at fortune.com, and that's a more businessy site, and they looked at vintage and the resale market, how re-commerce players like Poshmark and eBay are adapting to the coronavirus, how the market for reselling used clothing and other goods is taking a real hit from the virus and the pandemic. And obviously, with our discussions about sustainability and circularity, etc., you know, we've examined vintage as an alternative fashion expression many times. So it's interesting to sort of continue to monitor what's happening in those worlds and how developments are occurring and what's going on there. I also looked at a website called NotJustLabelcom, and they focus on technology and the digitization of fashion in the new online world. So it's not like we've just, you know, begun a new online world. It's been happening for many years, but they've sort of prismed in on how technology is influencing functional clothing, fashion, costume design, performance, even fabric technology, etc. So what the future of fashion is and the digital world is quite interesting, and they take a look at that. One of my favourites was the New York Times, and they looked at the economic and humanitarian angle of the impact of the Covid-19 pandemic in the fashion industry, and their headline was "Our situation is apocalyptic. Bangladesh garment workers face ruin." And obviously the new coronavirus is potentially disastrous for low-wage workers who power the global clothing trade. And when on every level the industry and, you know, is being impacted, but this is a particularly interesting area to look at, and how it affects fast fashion, high street fashion, and that area of the industry. If you're a subscriber, Goop.com, which is Gwyneth Paltrow's online site, they covered the COVID-19 pandemic with a beauty angle, and they drafted in a really famous makeup artist called Gucci Westman, who told the Goop audience how to get dressed for Zoom and FaceTime check-ins, and how to look their best. So that's just another, you know, piece of content that, you know, a lot of people are avenues that people are going down. Very interesting to look at the different ways and the different sort of priorities that websites have. So I'm not saying that this was funny. I thought it was particularly right for the Goop audience, and perhaps I need to take a leaf out of their own book as well, because I could probably do with thinking about my own makeup routine before I come online again. Anyway, and VogueBusiness.com, they talked about the world of influencers and COVID-19. So how many fashion influencers are finding new opportunities was it during COVID-19, because travel bans, quarantine orders, they all restrict regular work, and influencers are riding an increase in online traffic from housebound audiences. So there's a lot going on there that you could think about and delve into as well. And also, of course, we've got the world of Instagram, and there's masses going on Instagram as well. For example, Alexander McQueen, the House of McQueen, they've sort of set up a platform called McQueen Creates, and it's a collaborative space encouraging people to sort of talk about their own creativity and Alexander McQueen. I had a look at the Telegraph Fashion Instagram, and they were talking about fashion books to read while in isolation, and that again is a different way of producing content that's particularly satisfying right now, because people are at home and they want to sort of find useful things to occupy themselves. I was particularly interested in this because they featured my book, Legendary Artists and the Clothes They Wore. So thanks for that, guys. But yeah, I mean, there's lots out there, and I think that looking and reflectively reading what's going on at the moment in these very early stages of isolation for so many people, and spotting the areas of creativity and sort of analysing the different priorities that content providers have, and also noticing what sits well and what feels a bit wrong as well. It can also help you in fathoming what it is that you want to write about and what you want to talk about on your own websites and platforms. So good luck with that, and I will look very much forward to reading your writing, looking at your pictures, listening to your podcasts and watching your films, and discovering stuff I don't know. So thank you very much, and I will see you next week. Bye. Sorry, one last slide I forgot about. Last but not least, the ft.com focused on how fashion is responding in swift ways to help the Covid-19 pandemic, and how fashion houses are finding creative ways to help in the fight. An emergency designer network is using its skills and production facilities to make medical masks, for example, from Prada through to smaller scale designers like Ili Kushimoto. They're all out there turning their facilities into mask making factories. So that's also another area of fashion that you might want to have a look at. Okay, that really is the end now. So thank you very much, and I will see you next.